Let's talk about a war that lasted just 13 days but completely redrew the map of South Asia. It was a lightning-fast conflict that ended up creating an entirely new country. This is the story of how Bangladesh was born.
The first shot of the international war was fired on December 3, 1971. Pakistan launched a massive, surprise airstrike called Operation Genghis Khan, hitting 11 Indian airfields all at once. The goal? To cripple India's air force before it could even get off the ground. But here's the thing. This attack wasn't the beginning of the story. Nope. It was the explosive final act of a crisis that had been building for decades.
So that really begs the question, right? How did an internal Pakistani fight over culture and power turn into a horrifying genocide, a massive refugee crisis, and then a full-blown war with its neighbor, India? To really get it, we need to hit rewind and go back to the very beginning.
The roots of this war were actually planted the moment Pakistan was created back in 1947. You see, it was a nation built on a shared religion, but that was pretty much the only thing holding it together.
And here was the biggest, most obvious problem. Pakistan was one country, but in two separate pieces. West Pakistan and East Pakistan were separated by 1,600 kilometers of, well, India. Just think about that for a second. Geographically, it was an absolute nightmare, maybe even an impossible situation from the start.
But that huge distance wasn't just about geography. The two wings of Pakistan were completely different worlds. In the west, you had the center of all political, military, and economic power. In the east, you had the Bengali people, who actually made up the majority of the country's population, but were treated like second-class citizens. They felt less like an equal partner and more like a distant colony.
And if you want to see how that played out, just follow the money. It's pretty stark. East Pakistan was the economic engine. It generated over 60% of the country's revenue. But where did all that money go? It was siphoned off to build up the West. You can see it right here in the growth rates. This wasn't just a partnership, it was economic exploitation, and it was breeding some serious resentment.
The first real crack in the nation's unity came over language. In 1948, the government, based in the West, declared that Urdu would be the only national language. For the millions of people in the East who spoke Bengali, this was a slap in the face. It was an attack on their culture, on their very identity. When students protested in 1952 and the police opened fire, killing them, it created the first martyrs for the Bengali nationalist movement.
So for years, all these tensions were just simmering below the surface. But in 1970, a national election happened. And instead of solving things, it brought everything to a violent, horrifying boiling point. The election results couldn't have been clearer. A Bengali nationalist party from the east, the Awami League, won a clean, outright majority of seats in the national parliament. Democratically, that meant their leader, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, should have been the next prime minister. But the powerful military and political elite in West Pakistan, they just refused to let it happen.
So, instead of a peaceful transfer of power, the Pakistani military gave their response, Operation Searchlight. And let's be clear about what this was. This wasn't just putting down a protest. It was a carefully planned, brutal military crackdown designed to crush the Bengali nationalist movement for good by targeting and killing its leaders, intellectuals, students, anyone who resisted. This was the beginning of a genocide.
What followed was a humanitarian catastrophe on an unbelievable scale. As the Pakistani army unleashed its terror, people started running for their lives. A flood of refugees, 10 million people, poured over the border into India. Can you even imagine that? It created a crisis that India simply could not handle on its own.
And for the people who couldn't escape, the toll was even more horrific. While the exact numbers are still debated, it's estimated that the Pakistani army and their local allies killed as many as 3 million people. It was a systematic campaign of murder and violence on a massive scale.
So, you've got a genocide happening right on your border and a refugee crisis that's about to collapse your own country. India's hand was pretty much forced. When Pakistan launched that preemptive airstrike on December 3rd, it was the final straw. India officially entered the conflict, and a civil war instantly became an international war.
India's plan was brilliant and perfectly coordinated. It was a three-front assault. First, the Air Force took control of the skies in just 2 days. Second, the Navy launched operations to blockade the coasts, cutting off all supplies and reinforcements for the Pakistani army. And finally, the Indian army, fighting alongside the Bengali freedom fighters known as the Mukti Bahini, launched a lightning-fast invasion on the ground.
Now, while the main event was in the east, some incredible battles were happening on the Western Front too. The Battle of Longawala is the stuff of legend.
You're talking about just 120 Indian soldiers holding off a Pakistani force of 2,000 soldiers and dozens of tanks. It was a true David versus Goliath story, where sheer courage and smart tactics held the line until air support could arrive at dawn. Absolutely incredible.
And out at sea, the Indian Navy was just devastating. In a series of bold attacks, they crippled Pakistan's main naval port in Karachi, sank major warships and even a submarine, and completely sealed off the coast of East Pakistan. They basically knocked the Pakistani Navy out of the war in the first few days.
And this is where the conflict almost blew up into a global crisis. You see, it quickly turned into a Cold War chess match. The United States, an ally of Pakistan, sent its massive 7th Fleet sailing towards the Bay of Bengal to intimidate India. But then, India's ally, the Soviet Union, sent its own nuclear fleet to stare them down. Suddenly, you had two superpowers in a tense naval standoff, and the stakes were unbelievably high.
But despite all that international pressure and the nuclear brinksmanship, the momentum on the ground was just unstoppable. This war was racing towards a very quick and very decisive end.
The speed of the Indian and Mukti Bahani advance was just breathtaking. It was a total blitz. They used their speed, their coordination, and local knowledge from the Bengali fighters to completely outmaneuver the Pakistani forces. In less than 2 weeks, they were totally surrounded in the capital city, Dhaka, with nowhere left to run.
And this led to one of the most remarkable scenes in modern military history. On December 16th, 93,000 Pakistani soldiers laid down their weapons in a public ceremony in Dhaka. To this day, it's the largest military surrender of any army anywhere in the world since the end of World War II.
With the signing of that document, the instrument of surrender, the war was officially over. The state of East Pakistan was gone, and in its place, forged in fire and sacrifice, was a brand new nation, Bangladesh. After the surrender, the pieces fell into place pretty fast. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was released from a Pakistani prison and returned to a hero's welcome to become the first leader of Bangladesh. India and Pakistan signed the Shimla Agreement to make the peace official. And just a few years later, Bangladesh was formally recognized and took its seat at the United Nations.
So when you boil it all down, what's the story here? Well, it's a conflict that grew out of years of one group suppressing another's culture and economy. It was kicked off when a democratic election was simply ignored, which then led to a genocide. And finally, India's decisive military action, which was prompted by that massive refugee crisis, was what ultimately led to the birth of Bangladesh and totally reshaped the power dynamics of South Asia forever. And that leaves us with one last big thought. The story of 1971 is this powerful, tragic reminder that lines drawn on a map often mean very little when faced with the powerful forces of culture, language, and a shared identity. It really makes you wonder, when a group of people feel their identity is being erased, is it only a matter of time before they decide to redraw the map themselves?